What Meghan Markle thought she could hide from the monarchy has finally been exposed. The moment King Charles sat across from Prince Harry at Clarence House, the air was thick with tension, unspoken truths, and emotions that had been simmering for years. Imagine the scene, the gilded walls of the palace reflecting not just opulence, but secrets, betrayal, and the heavy weight of royal duty. Charles's eyes betrayed a storm beneath a composed exterior. Harry, usually the composed yet rebellious son, sat uneasy, sensing that the reconciliation meeting he had hoped would bring closure might instead unravel every carefully kept secret. And in that very moment, a decision was made that would shake the foundations of the monarchy. Meghan Markle would be banned from using her HRH title and stripped of her Duchess title. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. But why now? Why at this very moment? And how did a single meeting, meant to heal old wounds, ignite a series of revelations that the public will never forget? To understand, we need to take a deep dive into the web of secrets, manipulations, and alliances that have defined Meghan's path through the royal family. This isn't just another royal scandal. This is a story of ambition, deception, and power. It's a story that proves that titles, appearances, and public statements can mask a very different reality behind palace doors. The meeting at Clarence House was not an ordinary sit-down. Sources described the atmosphere as electric, almost unbearable, with every word weighed carefully, every glance conveying unspoken meaning. King Charles, long seen as a patient and diplomatic figure, had reached a breaking point. He had endured decades of public scrutiny, family tension, and personal trials. But the revelations that came from this meeting weren't just about old family disputes. They were about uncovering a hidden agenda that could alter the very perception of the monarchy itself. Imagine the shock, the disbelief, the emotional conflict that surged through the room as Charles pieced together the implications of Meghan's actions. And Harry, caught between loyalty to his father and love for his wife, could do nothing but watch the storm unfold. What exactly did Charles discover? Insiders claim it was evidence of calculated maneuvers that went far beyond the public persona of a duchess devoted to royal duties. There were secret communications, undisclosed meetings, and strategic decisions designed to shift influence, control, and perception. In essence, what had seemed like a charming, modern approach to monarchy masked a carefully constructed agenda. And Charles, a man known for his sense of duty and foresight, was not about to let this pass unchecked. The implications were monumental. Removing the HRH title, stripping the Duchess designation, these were not decisions made lightly. They were statements, a warning, a recalibration of the monarchy's boundaries and expectations. The stakes extend far beyond titles. Titles in the royal family are not mere symbols of status. They are power, privilege, and responsibility. To be stripped of them is to be publicly rebuked, a signal that trust has been broken beyond repair. Imagine the ripple effect, not just within the family, but across the media, the public, and even internationally. Meghan's influence, once expansive and celebrated, was suddenly called into question. Social media exploded with speculation, commentary, and outrage. Headlines flashed accusations, defenses, and theories about motives. The public watched, fascinated and horrified in equal measure, as the monarchy navigated one of its most dramatic storms in recent history. And yet, the truth behind this decision remained largely hidden until now. But what makes this revelation even more compelling is the human drama at its core. Behind every headline, every leaked memo, every whispered rumor, are real people, real emotions, and real consequences. Harry, often portrayed as the modern, relatable prince, faced an impossible choice. Confront the realities of his marriage, the loyalty to his father, and the expectations of a lifetime spent in the shadow of the crown. Charles, a father torn between love and duty, had to balance the future of the monarchy with the immediate emotional fallout of this disclosure. And Meghan, at the center of the storm, watched as the narrative shifted from admiration to scrutiny, from acceptance to challenge. The emotional intensity was palpable, almost cinematic in its scale, and the timing could not have been more dramatic. The reconciliation meeting, intended to mend decades of tension between Charles and Harry, instead acted as a catalyst. Long-simmering issues surfaced, old wounds reopened, and secrets, once carefully concealed, were laid bare. The palace, a place synonymous with order, tradition, and protocol, became a theater of revelation. Every word exchanged carried weight, every gesture a message. And as the meeting drew to a close, the implications of what was discussed began to reverberate. By the end of that day, the course of Meghan's role in the monarchy had irrevocably changed. The HRH title was no longer hers to claim, and the Duchess title, once a symbol of status and acceptance, was rescinded. Why did Charles choose to act now? Some speculate that years of patience, discretion, and negotiation had finally reached their limits. Others suggest that the meeting with Harry provided critical context that made the decision unavoidable. Whatever the reason, the move signaled a new era in the monarchy, one where hidden agendas, manipulations, and public perception would no longer be tolerated without consequence. And yet, even as this decision made headlines and sent shockwaves through royal circles, it left unanswered questions. How would Harry respond? What would be Meghan's next move? Could the relationship between father and son withstand the fallout? And how would this reshape the future of the monarchy in a world increasingly focused on transparency, accountability, and image? This story is not just about scandal or gossip. It is about the collision of ambition, loyalty, and the complex expectations of royal life. It is about the decisions made in gilded rooms that have far-reaching consequences beyond the palace gates. It is about power, influence, and the lengths to which individuals will go to protect, assert, or reclaim them. And at its heart, it is about a family grappling with betrayal, love, and the consequences of choices that cannot be undone. As we explore this story in detail, each revelation will peel back another layer of intrigue, exposing truths that have remained hidden until now. The question remains, what was Meghan's ultimate goal? Was it power, influence, security, or something else entirely? And how did Charles uncover the truth that altered her path forever? By examining the evidence, the insiders' accounts, and the chronology of events leading up to the Clarence House meeting, we begin to see a picture that is both shocking and instructive. It is a story that challenges assumptions, upends expectations, and forces us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about one of the most high-profile couples in modern history. And just as the palace doors closed after that fateful meeting, the consequences began to unfold, slowly, methodically, and dramatically. Every decision, every revelation, every ripple would contribute to a narrative that was as much about human emotion as it was about royal protocol. It was a story of secrecy and exposure, of loyalty and betrayal, of love complicated by duty. And the most explosive elements? They were yet to be revealed. The stage is set. The players are in motion. And as we dive into the heart of this story, you will see just how much was hidden, how carefully every move was calculated, and how one meeting at Clarence House reshaped the monarchy's present, and perhaps its future. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The moment the palace doors closed behind them, an almost suffocating silence filled Clarence House. The air was thick with anticipation, tension, and a kind of unease that only years of unspoken grievances can create. Imagine it. The quiet hum of the heating, the faint ticking of an ornate clock on the wall, and two men, father and son, sitting across from each other, the weight of decades pressing down on them. This was meant to be a reconciliation meeting, a moment to heal, to bridge the gaps that had widened over years of misunderstandings, media scrutiny, and public spectacle. Yet, as anyone who has been in a charged room knows, when emotions run high and stakes are monumental, nothing ever goes according to plan. Charles leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled as he measured every word. There was an intensity in his gaze, a mixture of exhaustion and controlled anger. Harry shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between his father and the intricate patterns on the carpet beneath their feet. It was a meeting that had been arranged in secrecy, away from the public eye, away from the cameras, and away from the endless speculation. But secrecy does not guarantee comfort. Sometimes it amplifies the tension. Every glance, every pause, every hesitation carried the weight of history. You might wonder, what could make a reconciliation meeting so volatile? It wasn't just the lingering shadow of Meghan Markle, though she was an unspoken presence in the room. It was the accumulation of years of public scrutiny, private disappointments, and expectations that were impossible to satisfy. Charles, who had long been viewed as patient, diplomatic, and composed, was not a man accustomed to sudden revelations disrupting his careful calculations. Harry, for all his charm and rebellious streak, had lived a life constantly observed, constantly judged, and he knew instinctively when a moment was about to pivot from mundane to catastrophic. And pivot it did. The conversation began cautiously, almost politely, with Charles asking about Harry's life in California, his children, and his work. But beneath the surface, there was a current of probing questions, subtle observations, and carefully veiled skepticism. Charles, with decades of experience navigating palace politics and media narratives, could sense when a story was incomplete, when details were omitted, when truths were selectively shared. He listened closely, nodding at times, frowning at others, and occasionally remaining silent, allowing the weight of his presence to fill the room. Harry tried to maintain composure, recounting his experiences in a way that would convey honesty while protecting his personal life. But every word he spoke seemed to uncover a new layer of tension. Charles's expression remained inscrutable, but insiders would later say that subtle shifts in his demeanor betrayed growing alarm. It wasn't just what Harry was saying. It was what was implied, what was left unsaid, and the inconsistencies that began to emerge. The discussion inevitably turned to Meghan. Her name was spoken with caution, almost reverence, but the weight of her influence was palpable. Charles asked about her intentions, about the decisions that had led to the couple stepping back from royal duties, and about their private ambitions. Harry responded with carefully measured statements, defending Meghan while attempting to navigate the thin line between honesty and loyalty. But every explanation seemed to reveal more than it concealed. Every defense subtly hinted at a deeper strategy, a hidden agenda that Charles was quick to detect. Insiders claimed that the king's demeanor shifted in that moment. A subtle tightening of his jaw, a flicker of disbelief in his eyes, and a silence that lasted longer than polite conversation would allow. Harry felt it immediately. The tension had escalated from careful dialogue to something more profound, more urgent. It was as if the very fabric of trust had begun to unravel, thread by delicate thread. And in that silence, a realization struck both father and son. There were secrets long buried, and some of them were far more consequential than either had anticipated. But here's the twist. The most shocking revelation didn't come from words alone. It came from the documents, the correspondences, and the communications that Harry had, perhaps inadvertently, left accessible during discussions. Charles, with decades of experience, immediately recognized patterns of influence, manipulation, and subtle orchestration. It wasn't just about a disagreement or a difference in lifestyle. It was about the meticulous design of public perception, private maneuvering, and a strategy that sought to extend influence beyond what the monarchy would tolerate. The room, still quiet, became charged in ways that can only be felt, not described. Harry, sensing the gravity of the moment, began to understand that this meeting was no longer about reconciliation. It was about revelation. Every carefully curated narrative, every public statement, every behind-the-scenes decision that had gone unnoticed was suddenly exposed under the critical eye of a father who had mastered both patience and scrutiny. What followed was a careful interrogation masked as a conversation. Charles asked questions not just about events, but about intent. Why did this happen? What was your role? How did this align with the family's legacy? Each question landed with precision, forcing Harry to confront realities he may have avoided thinking about. And in that crucible, truths surfaced that neither could ignore. You might be asking, how does a conversation between father and son lead to the stripping of titles? The answer lies in understanding the stakes. In the monarchy, titles represent more than prestige. They symbolize trust, loyalty, and alignment with the institution's core values. When a member acts in ways that compromise those principles, the response is not only personal, it is institutional. And Charles, having lived a lifetime balancing personal emotion with the demands of the crown, recognized that some actions, once revealed, could not be overlooked. Harry tried to explain, to contextualize, to frame decisions in a way that might protect Meghan and himself. But Charles's insight, honed over decades of public scrutiny and private counsel left little room for ambiguity. Patterns that might have seemed innocuous in isolation suddenly formed a mosaic of intention that was difficult to ignore. The weight of these discoveries pressed heavily on both men. It wasn't just a family dispute anymore. It was a matter of royal duty, perception, and the future of the monarchy. And then, as if the tension could not grow any further, a new layer of revelation emerged. Insiders claimed that Charles had uncovered correspondences between Meghan and advisors, communications that suggested strategic planning aimed at consolidating influence and shaping public narratives. It wasn't just personal ambition, it was a calculated approach to public perception, designed in ways that threatened the institution itself. The gravity of these findings left Harry visibly shaken. The realization hit that loyalty, love, and marriage were no longer sufficient shields against the consequences of hidden agendas. The conversation spiraled into moments of raw emotion. Harry, usually composed under media scrutiny, showed signs of genuine distress. Charles, balancing authority with paternal concern, maintained composure but was unmistakably troubled. The meeting was no longer a simple attempt at reconciliation, it had become a reckoning. And as the minutes stretched into hours, the decisions that would define the next chapter of the monarchy's narrative began to crystallize in Charles's mind. It was clear that Meghan's influence, once celebrated, had crossed a line. The strategies, the communications, the hidden maneuvers, they were not just personal missteps, but actions with implications for the institution itself. And Charles, a man who had long been patient with deviations, knew that some responses were unavoidable. The stripping of titles, the public recalibration of authority, and the reinforcement of institutional boundaries were imminent. But even in this tense, high-stakes environment, one question lingered: how would Harry respond? Could he bridge the chasm between loyalty to his wife and responsibility to his father? And more importantly, what had Meghan done to prompt such a decisive and unprecedented reaction? The answers, still partially hidden, would begin to surface in ways that stunned even those closest to the monarchy. And just when it seemed that the room could not hold any more tension, a subtle but critical revelation came to light, one that would set the stage for the most explosive decisions yet. Something Harry had unintentionally revealed, or perhaps could not fully control, hinted at a calculated agenda far beyond what Charles had initially suspected. And in that moment, the true scope of Meghan's influence, and the stakes involved, became undeniably clear. The tension, the revelations, and the silent judgments created a scene that insiders would describe as unforgettable. Clarence House, usually a place of measured diplomacy and controlled appearances, became a crucible for exposure, emotion, and decision-making that would have consequences reaching far beyond its walls. And as the meeting drew to a close, both men understood that what had begun as an attempt at reconciliation had transformed into a turning point. One that would redefine titles, authority, and family dynamics forever. But what came next? The decision, the communication to the palace, and the ripple effect that would reach every corner of the royal world, would shock the public and leave Meghan facing consequences no one could have imagined. And yet, even as the doors closed behind that meeting, one question remained. Would Harry be able to navigate the fallout without losing the trust of his father, or had the reconciliation attempt inadvertently accelerated the storm that was about to engulf them all? The Clarence House meeting had begun as a tentative attempt at peace. It ended as the beginning of a royal reckoning. What if everything we thought we knew about Meghan Markle was only the surface of a carefully crafted story? What if behind the poised public appearances, the charitable gestures, and the charming smiles, there was a meticulously orchestrated plan, one designed to shift influence, control narratives, and reshape her place within the monarchy? The Clarence House revelations had only scratched the surface. In reality, Meghan's hidden agenda had been unfolding long before that fateful meeting with Charles and Harry. Insiders claimed that Meghan's approach to royal life was never entirely traditional. While the public saw a Duchess navigating royal duties with modern flair, the palace observed a series of subtle maneuvers that suggested ambition of a very particular kind. It started with small decisions, carefully curated charitable projects that bolstered her personal brand, strategic media interactions that controlled the narrative, and public statements that subtly highlighted differences between her values and those of the institution. To the casual observer, these might have seemed like minor deviations. But to Charles and senior advisors, patterns began to emerge, patterns that hinted at a carefully considered agenda. Consider, for a moment, the timing of key events. Every major initiative, every public interview, every philanthropic venture seemed to coincide with moments when scrutiny of Harry and Meghan was highest. Was this coincidence? Or was it a strategy designed to keep the spotlight firmly on Meghan, positioning her as both a modernizing influence and a central figure in the royal narrative? Sources suggest that this level of planning was intentional, and the Clarence House meeting confirmed what Charles had long suspected. Meghan's influence extended beyond mere charm. It was strategic, calculated, and, to the king, dangerously ambitious. What made it even more remarkable was Meghan's ability to frame her actions as benevolent and progressive. By presenting her initiatives as acts of charity, empowerment, or modernization, she masked the underlying objective: control. The palace began to notice that behind each seemingly altruistic project was a carefully constructed web of influence, public perception, and media manipulation. Statements that appeared spontaneous or heartfelt were often carefully scripted, vetted, and timed for maximum impact. In other words, Meghan had mastered the art of crafting appearances that disguised strategic intent. But the hidden agenda didn't stop at public influence. Communications obtained during the Clarence House discussions revealed evidence of private planning that extended into the highest levels of decision-making within the monarchy. Advisors reported emails, letters, and even whispered consultations with external agents that suggested a clear understanding of how to leverage both Harry's position and media coverage to shape outcomes in her favor. The revelations stunned Charles. It wasn't merely about ambition. It was about the potential to alter the monarchy itself. Every action Meghan had taken, no matter how small, carried implications that could influence perception, succession, and public trust. And yet, Meghan's agenda was not openly confrontational. She rarely, if ever, directly challenged the monarchy's authority. Instead, she acted in ways that were subtle, indirect, and sometimes invisible to those outside the inner circle. She understood optics. She understood timing. She understood the delicate balance of royal protocol, and she used that knowledge to her advantage. Every interview, every public appearance, and every charitable announcement was a calculated step in a much larger game. Charles, as the custodian of the monarchy, recognized this pattern almost immediately. He saw the signs that Meghan's influence was not incidental, not casual, and certainly not without intent. The moment he reviewed the communications, matched them with Harry's disclosures during their meeting, and contextualized them against the backdrop of public statements, a clear picture emerged. Meghan's actions were not random. They were deliberate. They were a hidden agenda designed to consolidate influence, shape perception, and assert control in ways the monarchy could not afford to ignore. This revelation explains the dramatic decision to strip Meghan of her HRH and Duchess titles. It wasn't just about protocol. It was about consequences. Charles realized that allowing her continued influence unchecked could set a dangerous precedent. It could signal that personal ambition could override duty, that private agendas could undermine public trust, and that the monarchy's authority was negotiable. And so, he acted decisively. But what was the heart of Meghan's hidden agenda? Some insiders describe it as a desire for autonomy, to wield power without being constrained by tradition. Others suggest it was about legacy, to redefine what it meant to be a modern royal on her terms. Perhaps it was a combination of both, wrapped in a sophisticated strategy that blended charm, influence, and media mastery. Whatever the exact motive, the impact was undeniable. Meghan had created a presence that extended beyond her role as Duchess, shaping conversations, perceptions, and expectations at every level of the royal institution. The palace had long been aware of the subtle ways she operated. Observers noticed patterns, carefully orchestrated interviews, selective sharing of personal anecdotes that humanized her while elevating her brand, and public statements that subtly contrasted her values against perceived outdated norms within the monarchy. Yet nothing had prepared Charles for the extent of the planning that became clear during the Clarence House revelations. It was as if he had been watching a game unfold for years. only to discover the rules had been rewritten without his knowledge. Even more astonishing were the tactics Meghan employed to influence Harry's position. Sources indicate that she encouraged decisions that emphasized his public persona, drew attention to perceived shortcomings within the institution, and subtly positioned herself as a stabilizing, guiding presence. Harry, who has always sought approval while also asserting independence, found himself both empowered and constrained by Meghan's influence. He was a loyal partner, yet the information revealed during the meeting made it clear that some of his actions were guided by strategic considerations rather than purely personal judgment. The implications extended further. Charles realized that Meghan's influence had not only impacted Harry, but also created ripples across the wider royal family. Her communications and strategic maneuvers had the potential to shift alliances, affect public opinion, and shape media narratives in ways that were both subtle and profound. Every speech, every charity event, every public appearance was a calculated move designed to reinforce a particular image and message. And while the public may have perceived these actions as benevolent or modernizing, the internal reality was far more complex, far more strategic, and far more threatening to the monarchy's traditional structure. Yet what makes this story even more compelling is the contradiction at its core. Meghan portrayed herself as a modernizer, a beacon of progress and inclusivity. But the Clarence House revelations suggest that beneath this veneer was a meticulously calculated agenda, one that prioritized influence and control over transparency and duty. The tension between public persona and private intent is staggering, and it is precisely this duality that fueled the dramatic response from Charles. As the palace staff later recounted, the moment Charles fully grasped the extent of Meghan's hidden agenda was both shocking and decisive. It was not merely a matter of personal betrayal or marital conflict. It was a challenge to the monarchy itself, a subtle but undeniable shift in power dynamics, and a test of the institution's ability to withstand internal manipulation. Charles, with decades of experience navigating scandals, public scrutiny, and family disputes, recognized that action was necessary. The decision to remove Meghan's titles was not reactionary. It was preemptive, protective, and emblematic of the monarchy's broader responsibility to maintain authority, trust, and continuity. And yet, even as this decision was made, questions lingered. How would Meghan respond? How would Harry reconcile loyalty to his wife with allegiance to his father and the crown? Could any relationship survive revelations of this magnitude? Or had the reconciliation meeting inadvertently accelerated the very conflicts it sought to resolve? The answers were uncertain, and the palace braced for a public and private fallout that would be as dramatic as it was unavoidable. But just when it seemed that the situation could not become more intense, an unexpected discovery added a new layer of complexity. Sources suggest that communications uncovered during the Clarence House discussions hinted at alliances and strategies that extended far beyond the immediate family. External influencers, media strategists, and public figures may have been involved in shaping Meghan's agenda, creating a network of influence that had operated largely in the shadows. And with this revelation, the full scope of her plan, one that had carefully manipulated perception, power, and opportunity, began to emerge in ways that stunned even seasoned palace observers. The hidden agenda was no longer hypothetical. It was real, it was documented, and it was powerful enough to demand decisive action. The removal of HRH and Duchess titles was the first step in a series of consequences that would ripple through the monarchy, the media, and the public consciousness. Meghan's influence, carefully cultivated over years, had provoked a response that would alter the course of her life, her marriage, and the perception of the royal institution forever. And yet, even as the titles were revoked and the palace prepared for the inevitable media storm, one question remained. What would Meghan do next? How would she respond to the exposure of her hidden agenda, the stripping of her formal titles, and the public scrutiny that would follow? And most importantly, could the monarchy weather the aftershocks of this revelation without further fracturing? The answers, as we will see, are as unpredictable as they are explosive. Titles are more than words in the royal family. They carry weight, authority, and a history that stretches back centuries. They represent trust, responsibility, and a public promise to uphold the values of the monarchy. When a title is stripped, it's more than a symbolic gesture. It's a public declaration that trust has been broken and that actions have consequences. For Meghan Markle, the HRH title, the letters that signify Her Royal Highness, had been a mark of prestige, privilege, and recognition. Losing it was not just a personal blow. It was a seismic event with implications for her role, her influence, and her place in history. The decision to revoke Meghan's HRH title did not happen overnight. Sources close to the palace describe a careful deliberation process, one that balanced emotion, precedent, and public perception. Charles, with decades of experience navigating the delicate intersections of family and monarchy, recognized the gravity of the decision. Stripping a title is unprecedented in modern times and carries ramifications that ripple through every corner of the royal institution. Unlike other forms of punishment or public reprimand, the removal of HRH is permanent, formal, and impossible to ignore. What makes this controversy so compelling is the dual nature of the title itself. To the public, HRH is a marker of elegance, status, and proximity to power. But within the palace, it carries a deeper meaning. It signifies loyalty, alignment with the institution's responsibilities, and adherence to unwritten codes of conduct that have guided the monarchy for generations. In revoking it, Charles sent a message that ambition, strategy, or manipulation, even when veiled in charm and modernity, would not override the obligations that come with such a designation. The timing of the revocation added another layer of intrigue. Coming on the heels of the Clarence House meeting with Harry, the action appeared both reactive and preemptive. Reactive, because it addressed Meghan's immediate influence on her husband and the institution. Preemptive, because it aimed to prevent further manipulations or public narratives that could undermine the monarchy. Palace insiders note that the decision was a culmination of years of observation, careful consideration, and consultation with senior advisors. It wasn't about emotion alone. It was strategic, ensuring that the monarchy could assert its authority while maintaining the dignity of its traditions. But the decision also raised questions about precedent. In the modern era, very few royals have ever faced the revocation of HRH status. The title is rarely challenged, and even controversies involving other family members typically end with private resolutions or public explanations that preserve the symbolic weight of HRH. By taking this step, Charles not only reasserted his authority, but also set a clear boundary. Behavior, intentions, and alignment with royal duties are non-negotiable. For Meghan, the consequence was immediate and undeniable. The public recognition of HRH, once a symbol of her integration into the royal family, was officially withdrawn. This move sparked immediate media speculation. Headlines around the world questioned the reasoning, the timing, and the implications. Was this punishment purely personal? Or was it a strategic move designed to protect the monarchy's image, authority, and future? Social media amplified every rumor, every speculation, and every insider leak, creating a storm of public interest that had consequences both for Meghan and for the institution as a whole. Insiders report that Charles understood the dual necessity of this decision. Emotionally, it was a response to a perceived betrayal. Meghan's hidden agenda had come to light, and the king recognized the need to assert the monarchy's authority. Institutionally, it was about preservation, protecting the crown, the titles, and the expectations that accompany them. The HRH designation is not merely ceremonial. It's a formal acknowledgement of responsibility. Stripping it sends a powerful message about accountability and loyalty. But what does it mean for Meghan personally? To lose HRH is to lose the public acknowledgement of her status, the prestige associated with royal duties, and the implicit trust granted by the institution. It separates her from the monarchy not just legally, but symbolically. She can no longer represent the crown, engage in official duties under the royal banner, or claim the formal recognition that once set her apart. It's a public rebuke, a visible declaration that her ambitions, actions, or strategies have crossed a line that the monarchy cannot tolerate. The controversy deepens when we consider public perception. HRH is familiar to the public as a symbol of closeness to the throne. For centuries, it has signified proximity to power, not only in ceremony, but also in trust. When Meghan's HRH status was revoked, it prompted a flurry of discussion about fairness, tradition, and modern expectations. Was this a patriarchal move, an outdated exercise of authority, or a necessary step to protect the monarchy's credibility? The answers are complex. They intersect with the questions of influence, strategy, and hidden agendas that had emerged in the Clarence House revelations. Yet the palace knew this decision could not stand alone. The revocation of HRH required a narrative that justified the action both publicly and internally. Advisors emphasized transparency to maintain institutional trust, while simultaneously managing the delicate emotional landscape between Charles, Harry, and Meghan. Every word, every announcement, and every private briefing was carefully considered to ensure that the action would reinforce the monarchy's authority without creating irreversible public backlash. Even within the family, opinions were divided. Some saw the move as necessary, a way to protect the crown from unchecked influence. Others questioned whether the decision would deepen fractures between father and son, creating long-term relational damage that might be impossible to repair. Harry, for his part, was caught in the middle, balancing loyalty to his father and devotion to his wife. The revocation of HRH was a visible, undeniable consequence that forced him to confront the reality of the situation. The HRH title controversy also highlighted the intersection of personal ambition and public responsibility. Meghan had been praised for her modern approach, for bringing a new energy and perspective to royal duties. Yet the very skills that earned admiration, strategic thinking, media awareness, and influence, were now seen as part of a hidden agenda that threatened the monarchy. Charles's decision demonstrated the delicate balance required to navigate personal relationships, public perception, and institutional integrity. It was a reminder that even charm and goodwill cannot override the expectations and responsibilities inherent in royal life. As the palace prepared for the inevitable media storm, the ramifications of the decision were already spreading. Social media erupted with opinions, speculation, and debate. Journalists analyzed the timing, the motive, and the potential fallout. Public opinion was divided, with some defending Meghan's autonomy and modern perspective, and others applauding Charles's decisive action to uphold tradition and authority. The controversy became not just a personal matter, but a public spectacle, magnifying the stakes and pressure on all involved. And yet, as dramatic as the revocation of HRH was, it was only the beginning. Charles's actions signaled a recalibration of power, a public acknowledgement of betrayal, and the first step in a series of consequences that would further reshape Meghan's role within the royal family. The title, once a symbol of status and recognition, had become a focal point for conflict, exposure, and unprecedented action. But just when it seemed the HRH controversy had reached its climax, a new layer of intrigue emerged. Documents and insider accounts revealed that Meghan's approach to her title and her use of influence within the royal family extended far beyond appearances. It involved strategic communication, media engagement, and personal alliances that challenged the boundaries of tradition in ways that few had anticipated. Charles realized that the revocation of HRH was only one step in addressing a much larger, more complex situation. And as the palace prepared to act, one lingering question remained. How would Meghan respond to the stripping of the HRH title? Would she fight publicly, retreat quietly, or leverage the media to shape her own narrative? And most importantly, could this action prevent further manipulation, or had it only ignited a fire that would continue to consume the monarchy from within? The HRH title controversy was more than just a dispute over letters. It was a declaration of authority, a clash of agendas, and a moment that exposed the hidden tensions between personal ambition and institutional responsibility. And yet, the most dramatic revelations were still ahead. Revelations that would challenge perceptions, test loyalties, and redefine the stakes for everyone involved. The revocation of the HRH title was shocking enough, but the stripping of Meghan Markle's Duchess title marked an even more dramatic escalation. While HRH symbolizes proximity to the crown, the Duchess designation is a personal and public identity, one that defines status, role, and legacy. For Meghan, losing it was a profound blow, one that transformed her from a recognized member of the royal family into a figure no longer sanctioned by the institution she had married into. It was not just a loss of prestige. It was a public declaration that her place within the monarchy was no longer secure. The process of revoking the Duchess title, insiders reveal, was deliberate and calculated. Charles understood that this action, unlike HRH, carried both symbolic and practical consequences. In public perception, Meghan would no longer be addressed or recognized as the Duchess of Sussex. Official engagements, media representation, and royal communications would reflect the revocation, signaling to the world that the monarchy was taking a stand. In private, it served as a clear message to Harry, advisors, and extended family. Authority, loyalty, and alignment with the crown's values were non-negotiable. But why take such a drastic step? Many speculate that it was the culmination of months, even years, of subtle influence, strategy, and behind-the-scenes maneuvering. The Clarence House revelations had laid bare the extent of Meghan's hidden agenda, showing not only her influence over Harry, but also her capacity to shape public narratives. Charles realized that leaving the Duchess title intact would implicitly condone behavior he viewed as manipulative and damaging to the institution. By stripping the title, he reinforced a critical boundary. Ambition cannot supersede duty, and personal strategy cannot undermine tradition. The palace staff recalls the moment the decision was formalized as tense and monumental. Advisors meticulously prepared communications, anticipating the inevitable media scrutiny and public reaction. Legal teams reviewed precedents, ensuring the revocation could be executed without ambiguity. And Charles, long experienced in navigating complex family dynamics, approached the decision with a balance of authority and solemnity. It was a move that signified both personal judgment and institutional responsibility. Public reaction, once the news leaked, was immediate and polarized. Headlines ranged from shock to support, framing the story as a dramatic fall from grace or as an overdue assertion of royal authority. Social media became a battleground of opinions, with fans and critics debating the fairness, morality, and implications of the decision. Was Meghan being punished for ambition, or was the monarchy simply asserting its rights to control titles and responsibilities? The debate was intense, because unlike HRH, which could be framed in ceremonial terms, the Duchess title had personal resonance. It was a name, a role, and a brand, all stripped away in a single, decisive act. Insiders emphasized that Meghan's response, while not public at the time, was significant behind the scenes. Sources describe her shock, anger, and disbelief, mixed with strategic calculation. She understood the implications of losing both HRH and the Duchess title, and it forced her to reevaluate her approach to public engagement, media relations, and her relationship with Harry. The revocation was not merely a symbolic punishment. It reshaped the landscape of influence, communication, and personal identity. But there's a twist. The stripping of the Duchess title also revealed cracks in the palace's internal dynamics. Advisors debated the timing, fearing the public backlash might further complicate relations within the family. Some suggested that Charles should have anticipated Meghan's potential reaction and prepared for a counter-narrative in the media. Others argued that decisive action, no matter the backlash, was essential to preserve the monarchy's credibility. In the end, Charles acted, and the consequences would ripple far beyond the walls of Clarence House. One of the most striking aspects of this action is its impact on Harry. While HRH had already challenged his loyalty and sense of duty, losing the Duchess title was a direct affront to his personal and family life. He faced an impossible choice: defend Meghan publicly, risk further confrontation with his father, or find a way to reconcile loyalty with the unavoidable reality of her diminished status. Sources suggest that the tension in the family reached a boiling point, with private conversations becoming heated, emotional, and sometimes confrontational. The stripping of the Duchess title also had legal and financial ramifications. While titles themselves do not carry direct wealth, they are tied to estates, patronages, and the authority to represent the crown. Losing the title affected Meghan's ability to engage officially in charitable work under the royal banner and restricted her influence over certain decisions that had previously been within her purview. It was a stark reminder that titles are not mere symbols. They are instruments of authority, influence, and opportunity. And yet, even amid the drama, the palace remained vigilant about public perception. Communications teams crafted careful messaging to balance transparency with discretion, emphasizing institutional integrity without descending into personal attacks. It was a delicate dance, requiring careful orchestration to ensure that the revocation of the Duchess title reinforced the monarchy's authority while minimizing long-term reputational damage. But the story doesn't end there. Stripping the Duchess title exposed the broader stakes of Meghan's hidden agenda. Sources suggest that the title had been part of a larger strategy to consolidate influence, shape narratives, and control perception. Its removal not only curtailed her authority, but also undermined the network of alliances she had been cultivating behind the scenes. Advisors and insiders saw it as a turning point, the moment when the monarchy drew a clear line between personal ambition and institutional loyalty. And the most dramatic element? The removal of the Duchess title was only a prelude to further scrutiny. Communications obtained during the Clarence House meeting revealed additional actions that had remained hidden, actions that suggested a level of calculation, foresight, and strategy that few had anticipated. Charles, aware of the implications, knew that the story was far from over, that public and private challenges would follow, and that the monarchy would need to navigate a storm of perception, media attention, and familial loyalty. Even more explosive was the question of Harry's response. Would he defend Meghan? Would he attempt to reconcile with his father? Or would he, caught between love, loyalty, and reality, be forced to accept the consequences of a situation largely beyond his control? Sources indicate that Harry struggled with these questions, torn between protecting his wife and preserving a relationship with his father, a relationship that had already been strained by decades of tension, public scrutiny, and private disappointments. The stripping of the Duchess title became a defining moment, not just for Meghan, but for the monarchy itself. It underscored the boundaries of power, the consequences of hidden agendas, and the delicate interplay between personal ambition and institutional responsibility. For the public, it was a dramatic revelation, one that captured headlines, social media, and conversations around the world. For the palace, it was a necessary step to assert authority and protect the integrity of the institution. But just as the title was removed, another question loomed. What would Meghan do next? Would she retreat, regroup, or escalate her actions in response to this unprecedented rebuke? And how would this further complicate the fragile dynamics between her, Harry, and Charles? The answers were unknown, but one thing was clear. The stripping of the Duchess title was not just a punishment. It was the ignition of a series of events that would continue to unfold with shocking intensity. The moment news of Meghan Markle losing her HRH and Duchess titles broke, the world erupted. Headlines flashed across screens globally. Duchess stripped of title, royal fallout as HRH revoked. Meghan Markle faces unprecedented consequences. Social media became a whirlwind of speculation, memes, and heated debate. But beyond the sensationalism, this was more than a public scandal. It was a seismic event in the narrative of the modern monarchy. Every word, every post, every opinion became part of a swirling storm that amplified tension, spread rumors, and forced the palace to respond with unprecedented care. The reaction was immediate and polarized. Some voices championed Charles's decision, praising the monarchy for upholding tradition, authority, and accountability. To them, Meghan's removal of titles was a necessary corrective action, a reminder that ambition, manipulation, or hidden agendas cannot override centuries of institutional responsibility. They argued that Charles had acted decisively to preserve the integrity of the monarchy, drawing a clear line between personal preference and duty. Others, however, saw the move as overly harsh, even vindictive. Supporters of Meghan portrayed her as a modernizing influence who had been misunderstood, misrepresented, or unfairly targeted. Social media posts, op-eds, and interviews framed the revocation as a public humiliation, questioning whether the monarchy had overstepped in punishing a woman for ambition, strategic thinking, and assertiveness. Many argued that her actions, while perhaps ambitious, were framed by context, media narratives, and a desire to adapt the monarchy to modern expectations. Amid this cacophony, journalists, pundits, and analysts dissected every detail. News outlets published timelines of Meghan's initiatives, interviews, and public appearances, highlighting moments that supporters viewed as benevolent and critics interpreted as manipulative. Each news story, leak, or insider revelation fueled the fire. Headlines competed to reveal exclusive insights. Secret communications, strategic maneuvers, and private conflicts within Clarence House. The palace suddenly found itself not only managing a family dispute, but also navigating a global media onslaught. One of the most fascinating aspects of the media storm was the creation of dual narratives. On one side, Meghan was portrayed as a victim, a woman punished for her ambition and independence. On the other, she was depicted as a strategist, wielding influence and carefully crafting public perception. Both narratives drew attention, engagement, and debate, magnifying the story beyond what even palace insiders could have anticipated. And for Harry, caught in the middle, the media storm was a daily reality. Every headline, every commentary, and every viral post a reminder of the unprecedented pressure he faced as a husband, father, and prince. Palace communications teams moved quickly. Statements were carefully drafted, balancing clarity with discretion. They emphasized the necessity of the decisions while avoiding personal attacks. The challenge was immense. The palace needed to reinforce authority without inflaming public sentiment, manage family tensions, and prevent further leaks. Each carefully worded message had the dual purpose of controlling perception and maintaining the integrity of the monarchy. Insiders report that the public reaction was even more complex behind the scenes. Advisors monitored social media trends, public sentiment, and media coverage to anticipate backlash or support. Every post, retweet, and commentary became data, informing subsequent communication strategies. The palace was not just responding to headlines. It was managing a real-time global conversation that shaped perceptions, expectations, and reputational risk. And then there were the leaks. Anonymous sources, some loyal to Meghan and others to Harry, began sharing selective information, fueling speculation and intensifying the storm. Reports suggested private conversations, undisclosed strategies, and behind-the-scenes negotiations, each leak strategically timed to influence the narrative. The palace faced a new challenge, containing the story in a digital age where information travels instantaneously and speculation can spiral out of control within minutes. Public discourse quickly fractured into debates about fairness, gender, tradition, and modernity. Was Meghan being punished for simply being ambitious? Or had she violated the unwritten codes of loyalty and discretion expected of a royal? Commentators dissected every appearance, every interview, and every charitable initiative, framing them alternately as acts of progress or calculated strategy. The more people dug, the more polarizing the story became, intensifying pressure on both the palace and the individuals at its center. Yet amid the controversy, a surprising element emerged. The story captivated even those who rarely followed royal affairs. The stripping of titles, the hidden agendas, and the public confrontation resonated because it touched on universal themes: loyalty, betrayal, ambition, and authority. People didn't just watch the story unfold. They engaged, debated, and speculated, turning Meghan's loss of HRH and Duchess titles into a global cultural moment. For Charles, the media storm was both a challenge and a vindication. It demonstrated the reach of his decisions, the impact of the revelations, and the stakes involved in maintaining institutional authority. Yet it also revealed the personal cost. The story had exposed rifts, emotional conflicts, and private tensions that were now on public display. For Harry, navigating the storm meant balancing loyalty to his father with protection of his wife, all while being aware that every action, word, and appearance could become another headline. Insiders suggest that the storm also amplified Meghan's hidden agenda. Every report, every leak, and every viral discussion reinforced her presence in public consciousness, even as her formal titles were revoked. It was a paradox. The very act intended to diminish influence instead magnified her visibility, highlighting the delicate interplay between power, perception, and media in the modern monarchy. And yet, even amid this frenzy, the palace remained focused on long-term strategy. The removal of titles, the careful statements, and the internal communications were part of a larger plan to recalibrate authority, reinforce boundaries, and manage the unfolding narrative. Every detail mattered, every message was calculated, and every reaction was observed, creating a dynamic environment where decisions had both immediate and far-reaching consequences. But just when it seemed the HRH controversy had reached its climax, a new layer of intrigue emerged. Documents and insider accounts revealed that Meghan's approach to her title and her use of influence within the royal family extended far beyond appearances. It involved strategic communication, media engagement, and personal alliances that challenged the boundaries of tradition in ways that few had anticipated. Charles realized that the revocation of HRH was only one step in addressing a much larger, more complex situation. And as the palace prepared to act, one lingering question remained. How would Meghan respond to the stripping of the HRH title? Would she fight publicly, retreat quietly, or leverage the media to shape her own narrative? And most importantly, could this action prevent further manipulation, or had it only ignited a fire that would continue to consume the monarchy from within? The HRH title controversy was more than just a dispute over letters. It was a declaration of authority, a clash of agendas, and a moment that exposed the hidden tensions between personal ambition and institutional responsibility. And yet, the most dramatic revelations were still ahead. Revelations that would challenge perceptions, test loyalties, and redefine the stakes for everyone involved. The revocation of the HRH title was shocking enough, but the stripping of Meghan Markle's Duchess title marked an even more dramatic escalation. While HRH symbolizes proximity to the crown, the Duchess designation is a personal and public identity, one that defines status, role, and legacy. For Meghan, losing it was a profound blow, one that transformed her from a recognized member of the royal family into a figure no longer sanctioned by the institution she had married into. It was not just a loss of prestige. It was a public declaration that her place within the monarchy was no longer secure. The process of revoking the Duchess title, insiders reveal, was deliberate and calculated. Charles understood that this action, unlike HRH, carried both symbolic and practical consequences. In public perception, Meghan would no longer be addressed or recognized as the Duchess of Sussex. Official engagements, media representation, and royal communications would reflect the revocation, signaling to the world that the monarchy was taking a stand. In private, it served as a clear message to Harry, advisors, and extended family. Authority, loyalty, and alignment with the crown's values were non-negotiable. But why take such a drastic step? Many speculate that it was the culmination of months, even years, of subtle influence, strategy, and behind-the-scenes maneuvering. The Clarence House revelations had laid bare the extent of Meghan's hidden agenda, showing not only her influence over Harry, but also her capacity to shape public narratives. Charles realized that leaving the Duchess title intact would implicitly condone behavior he viewed as manipulative and damaging to the institution. By stripping the title, he reinforced a critical boundary. Ambition cannot supersede duty, and personal strategy cannot undermine tradition. The palace staff recalls the moment the decision was formalized as tense and monumental. Advisors meticulously prepared communications, anticipating the inevitable media scrutiny and public reaction. Legal teams reviewed precedents, ensuring the revocation could be executed without ambiguity. And Charles, long experienced in navigating complex family dynamics, approached the decision with a balance of authority and solemnity. It was a move that signified both personal judgment and institutional responsibility. Public reaction, once the news leaked, was immediate and polarized. Headlines ranged from shock to support, framing the story as a dramatic fall from grace or as an overdue assertion of royal authority. Social media became a battleground of opinions, with fans and critics debating the fairness, morality, and implications of the decision. Was Meghan being punished for ambition, or was the monarchy simply asserting its rights to control titles and responsibilities? The debate was intense, because unlike HRH, which could be framed in ceremonial terms, the Duchess title had personal resonance. It was a name, a role, and a brand, all stripped away in a single, decisive act. Insiders emphasized that Meghan's response, while not public at the time, was significant behind the scenes. Sources describe her shock, anger, and disbelief, mixed with strategic calculation. She understood the implications of losing both HRH and the Duchess title, and it forced her to reevaluate her approach to public engagement, media relations, and her relationship with Harry. The revocation was not merely a symbolic punishment. It reshaped the landscape of influence, communication, and personal identity. But there's a twist. The stripping of the Duchess title also revealed cracks in the palace's internal dynamics. Advisors debated the timing, fearing the public backlash might further complicate relations within the family. Some suggested that Charles should have anticipated Meghan's potential reaction and prepared for a counter-narrative in the media. Others argued that decisive action, no matter the backlash, was essential to preserve the monarchy's credibility. In the end, Charles acted, and the consequences would ripple far beyond the walls of Clarence House. One of the most striking aspects of this action is its impact on Harry. While HRH had already challenged his loyalty and sense of duty, losing the Duchess title was a direct affront to his personal and family life. He faced an impossible choice: defend Meghan publicly, risk further confrontation with his father, or find a way to reconcile loyalty with the unavoidable reality of her diminished status. Sources suggest that the tension in the family reached a boiling point, with private conversations becoming heated, emotional, and sometimes confrontational. The stripping of the Duchess title also had legal